Welcome to our third webinar on broadband in our Building Equitable Economies series. Today, we're going to be discussing a lot of the innovations going on the provider side and following up on the fantastic conversations that we had over the course of the past couple of weeks on innovations in financing and innovations in governance. Now we're going to talk about innovations in actually getting this stuff done in the ground, in the air, to the houses. Thank you for joining us here today. Broadband, this is an exciting topic to be talking about because it is really moving. We were thrilled at California Forward to have at our California Economic Summit in 2019, the governor come and announce his Broadband for All plan. Really pleased to partner with the administration on the action plan that they put together. Really excited that members of the legislature came to our summit last year and talked about how they are working together now, and right now just in a tremendous flurry of meetings with the administration, with the leaders of the legislature, because things are happening. There's federal spending, there's a series of legislation passing out of committee. We do expect that the state will invest directly in the general fund and in broadband infrastructure. And so we're getting going. And as we get going, I think it's really important to acknowledge the California Emerging Technology Fund is the co-sponsor of these webinars, but its CEO, Sunny Wright McPeak, has also been one of the real leaders of this effort when there wasn't as much of a consensus that we needed to do as much in the way that we need to do it. And so she and Trish Kelly from Valley Vision, that you'll be hearing from a little bit later today in our Q&A, Eduardo Gonzalez, Jason Schrenkler, a variety of different folks that are have been leading our California Economic Summit work. And so there's some stuff, housing say, where we still feel like we're crying out in the wilderness, trying to get people's attention about actually doing something in that area. But broadband is an area that we're feeling a lot more enthusiastic about. So thank you for joining us for this webinar today. We will be digging into some of the details, figuratively and literally. Next slide, please, Lauren. Yeah, that's me, Michael Weinberg, California Forward. I'm the moderator. Next slide. All right, quick housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded. We do ask the speakers to keep their mics on mute when they're not speaking. For the audience interaction portion of the webinar, please use the questions function, which is in the little control panel on the right side of your screen. Next slide. So just very quickly, those of you who have been joining us week over week have heard me talk about this, but for those of you who are new, really want to give you a sense of how this fits into the work that we do at California Forward. Basically, we start with the evidence. Our California Dream Index, and I'll be presenting just a couple of slides from that here, is our way of making sure that we understand what's actually going on in the state. We then really root ourselves in regional priorities, working with the members of our California Stewardship Network that care about triple bottom line development in their regions, racial and economic equity, environmental sustainability, and economic opportunity. We work together through the California Economic Summit to address the state's most pressing challenges, from housing to broadband to workforce development to wildfires, another area that we've had some terrific progress in lately. And then we carry that forward as necessary through our 501c4, the California Forward Action Fund. Next slide. Okay, so here's some data from the California Dream Index. This is the access to broadband with 25 megabits or higher access. And so we see that there are still parts of the state, especially the northern part of the state, that really have no access to baseline broadband at all. there's decent coverage in terms of this sort of like baseline broadband. But next slide, please. What we really want to emphasize is that as we begin to get into the broadband speeds that are really necessary for actively participating in today's society and economy, the number of geographies, the number of people that have access to this gets lower and lower. So when you look at 100 megabits, the coverage of the state gets lower, and obviously, we presented some statistics in the past around how this is worse for folks with lower income, worse for community of color. But when you get to the 1,000 megabits up and down, and so you're talking about really access to telemedicine, you're talking about access to robust e-commerce, you're talking about those types of speeds. There are very, very few parts of the state that have that level of broadband access. So broadband isn't just do you have it or don't you? It's a question of speed, and there's actually more than Zoom that people can do over broadband. All right, next slide. So let's get this going. And to do so, I want to bring up John Paul. He's the Chief Business Development Officer of Spiral Fiber, and you are doing some really exciting stuff in the middle northern part of the state, I guess. And we're really excited to hear what you have to share with us today about your innovative approach. Take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Yeah, it's been a long process here. Go ahead to my slides, Lauren. I've been, first of all, let me tell you where upper middle part of the state is. Go ahead to the next slide. We're in Nevada County, and we're about 60 miles northeast of Sacramento, 84 west of Reno, about 147 from San Francisco, and of course 206 from Burning Man, just for those who need to know. We're anchored by the cities of Nevada City and Grass Valley. We're an old gold mining town. Back in the day, we were the second largest city, or third largest city in the state during 1850, 1851, next to Sacramento and San Francisco. You can go to the next slide. We have a lot of highlights of technology and innovation here, ironically, partially due to the gold rush. We were the first long distance telephone call was made here, of course, from the mine to probably financiers at that time. We had the largest network of electric power lines here due to using our water power sources, and it started here. And of course, this was the home of PG&E back in the day in the late 1800s. In the mid part of the 20th century, we became home to the Grass Valley Group, which was a very innovative broadcast video technology company that spawned lots of different companies as it grew and shrank over the years. And so we've become a real nexus of that kind of technology. Many people don't know that we have a large technology sector here in Nevada County. Go to the next slide. The service area we're looking at is really the eastern part of the county right now. It's about 385 square miles. In the middle of Nevada County is Tahoe National Forest. Not a lot of people live there. And then, of course, on the eastern side is Truckee, adjacent to Tahoe. Turns out that fixed wireless providers in our area can only cover about 25%. They often show on the broadband map 100% coverage, but because of trees and hills and all those things, nasty things that get in the way, they really don't provide a full coverage as we could here. As many of us know, the incumbent telephone company, primary one in the state, is ending DSL service. They announced last October. So if anyone here sells a home and shuts off their DSL service, it goes away with the new owner. It's just not available, which is really crazy making for homeowners. The cable companies, like in most rural areas, are very small imprints. They tend to be in downtown Nevada City, downtown Grass Valley, and some other clusters, but generally in the broader sense, they don't exist. And of course, we're a tier 3 and 2 fire threat area. Last summer, I was evacuated from my home for the first time. It's pretty scary to actually leave and look at your house and think that you're not going to be going back into it. So that plays a key part in having better broadband in our area. Next slide. A little short history. In 2006, myself and my business partner at the time took over a customer base of internet customers here from a nonprofit that had started service here for about 10 years. And we took it over in 2006. We were reselling DSL, and we actually had about 100 dial-up customers in 2006 because that's all those folks could get. And we knew from the very beginning that that little business was not really going to allow us to grow. So we started to look at alternatives to that. In March 2010, Google sent out that surprise announcement that they were going to pick one community in the country to give gigabit service. That's when the word gigabit started to show up in the consciousness of internet. And we, of course, thought Nevada City would be perfect. They, of course, thought otherwise and gave it to Kansas City, both Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas, which great story that neither of those cities knew they were being courted by Google at the time that happened. In 2013, CSF, the California Advanced Services Fund, grant monies through the Public Utilities Commission became available in a big way. We applied for a grant in February of that year. And because of the challenges of the wireless providers and cable providers and just an arduous process, it took us 3 years to actually get funded because everything was put on hold till we could quantify that the wireless providers were not, in fact, covering 100% of the county, which they weren't. That was once we were awarded a grant, I went into rapid fundraising. I needed to match that with 12 million, and I found that 12 million is a horrible spot to raise for venture capital. It's too much for small investors. It's very risky for them, and it's way too little for the infrastructure investment firms who would like to invest in broadband, especially now. So I had to really look around and figure out what to do. And I took that project, which is connecting 2,900 homes in a 26 square mile area where there was no DSL even in a community, area of our county where there was no even DSL. And that I sold that to Race. Race is now building that. People are so excited that they have gigabit service up here. So that has started. And then in 2020, we started Spiral Fiber because there were more things to do. And here we go. Next slide. I found that education and organizing is really key to letting your community know why broadband is imperative. It's very confusing for people to understand their internet service. Sometimes you'll ask people, well, what kind of internet do you have? And they go, Wi-Fi. Well, they don't have Wi-Fi. They have some provider and the Wi-Fi is in their house. So we started with a rally parade and video as part of the Google Fiber experience. We got a lot of exposure for that. We're even on Katie Couric's CBS News reporting on Nevada City. As a part of our funding endeavor after we went to get funding from the PUC, we did a visioning workshop and a public event here where we came up with a great document about why we need fiber here and what will look like in 2025, and that's available to download. We can provide that link later. I also did a lot of surveying at that point, as well as community events to find out what people really wanted. And then we used the concept of neighborhood champions through some aggregation software we're using, customer aggregation software, which we wound up getting 90 people in that Bright Fiber project area to sign up and go around and talk to their neighbors. And we trained them all in what broadband was and what they could do. And they went out and knocked on doors. It was pretty phenomenal. Next slide. So the barriers and challenges, like I said, raising only 12 million in private investment is not easy. They want more. They want you to come up with a bigger project. The grant challenges based on incumbent claims is really hard because what it turns out to be is wind up having unserved households. If you look at this map here, the red area is the Bright Fiber project that was funded. The kind of purplish blue area, especially on the left side, is an area that 3 months before we were funded, Comcast came swooping down and said, we provide service there. And I said, fine, we'll let it go. But when we actually drove that area afterward, we found out that maybe 20% of those houses were connected. So that was a sad thing to hear. Next. I also said that in that last slide that our legislators at the time did not understand broadband, and clearly, thanks to the pandemic in many ways, everybody's talking about it now. So we decided to go big in last year. There was a lot more to do here in Nevada City. I had already had mapped out 3 other phases that could be built. So we're going to be connecting 15,000 homes and 400 businesses. There's definitely political will here now. The county, which was supportive all along, is now wholly supportive in many ways, and private funding is available now because of this push for fiber across the country. There is interest in infrastructure investment, and of course, as you know, you heard about AB 14, and then federal money that's going to be coming to broadband as well makes it really a great time for a provider like us to move forward. Next. So these are like the 10 things that I think are important when either a community or a small provider wants to go forward with building a fiber project. It takes perseverance. You really have to know you're in it for the long haul. I've been doing this for 13 years now, so I get it. You need political will. You really have to educate your local government about why this is important and why they need to be involved in many ways. And our county has stepped up in a huge way to help us. Educating community, a knowledgeable community who understand why their broadband doesn't work and how it could be better is really imperative. Having a vision and plan where you're moving to and how you're going to do it. Of course, it's a business plan if you're a business. If it's a county, it's a feasibility study and how to move forward. Flexibility. If anything I learned about this is you got to turn on a dime and move in a different direction at any moment during the process until you really start probably putting a fiber in the ground. And then mobilizing your community, getting them organized. Once you educate them, you kind of get them behind you. They can write letters, to the state and to the county. Have fun with it. I had a really great time during this process. I've met some amazing people along the way. So having fun is kind of key in life, I think. I think we learned that in the last year. Staying updated. There's conferences. I'll give some information at the end of the slide deck to go to and just learn more about what it takes to build better broadband, and then taking the time to unplug, especially if you're somebody who's really active in the community and getting this done, meaning have a vacation. Next slide. So these are the 2 conferences that are coming this year. They're actually going to be in person. They were virtual last year. One is Fiber Connect. I sit on the marketing committee of that organization. It is more of a trade organization that's happening in Nashville, but there'll be lots of workshops if you're a community or if you're just beginning to start a project or want to find out more about it. It's about a 3 or 4 day conference. Broadband Community Summit. If you're a county or government person, that's a really great event to go to because it tends to attract more of those communities there. And so you hear a lot of case studies. It's where I really got excited about what we were doing because I met with the folks in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that's a great story, which I'm not going to tell right here. So those are coming up. Next slide. And that's it. This is me. I unplugged by going to Burning Man every year, and that's me after I volunteered at the gate and got very dusty one year. There's my contact information, and later on I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I think you get the award for being the coolest presenter we've had in this series with your broadband, your Burning Man broadband photo. Perhaps I'll see you on the playa some year. And then also the quickest presentation per slide. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure that folks will have a lot of questions, but we have a couple more presentations before we get to the Q&A. So next slide, please, Lauren. So we'd now like to bring up Doug Patterson. He's the Regional Director of Crown Castle, and he's going to be telling us about some cool stuff that they are doing in micro trenching and other innovations.
Hi there, thank you. We can start with the next slide. A couple of things I want to talk through really around underground fiber construction, as well as at the end some aerial construction items that we have worked through at Crown Castle that we feel has really been impactful to deploying infrastructure specific to fiber optics. So we can go to the next slide. I can go to the next. We'll start out just real quick, an overview about Crown Castle on the next slide. So Crown Castle, really what we refer to ourselves as a shared infrastructure company. And part of that shared infrastructure really has started in the past 25 years with our tower side. And we have over 40,000 cell sites, cell towers across the country. And most recent in the small cell space, a little over 80,000 small cells that are on air or under contract, and tying those small cells together, 80,000 route miles of fiber. And we consider ourselves what we call carrier agnostic, which means we'll build for any carrier or any provider and be able to share that infrastructure in the future. So we can go to the next slide. So getting into microtrenching, and we can start with the first slide in microtrenching if we can advance. With microtrenching, and what I want to share with microtrenching is really Crown's vision of it, and what over the past decade plus of where microtrenching has started, and really where we feel the technology has come to where we can utilize this at scale and really drive investment relating to fiber deployment and getting fiber infrastructure deployed at a scale that is being required to keep up with the demand that we're seeing in the market. So what this really solves for us in a lot of jurisdictions where we're not able to use, let's say, traditional bore technology, where we're really facing an open trench type deployment, microtrench is again how we're viewing it. We're able to provide a trench that is 2 inches wide and beginning at 16 inches deep, and in some cases we can go as deep as 26 inches. But we really have found for fiber optic deployment that 16-inch depth keeps us in a place where we avoid any other underground obstruction to other existing utilities, as well as it keeps us deep enough to where in working with jurisdictions to be out of conflict in the future with any future road work. So on a traditional microtrench, we start out with following all of the 811 and the pre-construction activities relating to locates and the potholing activities associated with ensuring that we're not going to be in conflict to those utilities. We have our machinery that is able to trench at a 80% faster than a traditional underground trenching, and this is really where the technology we feel has improved to provide a very clean trench line. We're able to use that trench to deploy conduit and microfiber that I'll talk through in a minute that can meet all current and future infrastructure needs with the capacity we're deploying. And then after placing that conduit, we're restoring that trench with a material and products that have come a long ways that has a very rapid cure to where we have very minimal traffic disruption, and it's totally changed how we are able to work in the right of way in an underground environment. And on the next slide, I'll show the open trenches that we've seen and had to experience in the past, where we feel like this totally changes the game for it. So on the left is a traditional microtrench that we're doing now today compared to what we have faced, and these are our real life examples of open trenching, and it results in plating of the road in order to keep it open for us to be able to connect on very long projects, and we're able to avoid all of that. We're able to deploy with our trenching and open those roads same day. And on the right side is really where the technology with our microduct and microfiber technology, where we're able to deploy the same amount of fiber capacity as we would in that traditional open trench method. So at the end of the day, we're seeing a product that meets and can scale and not be impactful to our jurisdictions when it comes to time to resurface roads, but it's also deploying at a speed that is days compared to weeks and months. And the reinstatement materials, we are seeing that they will last as long as necessary before the next resurface of that road. So it's driving investment that we wouldn't have been making otherwise without this technology. So we can go to the next slide. So I want to talk through our success story that we have in LA. And around 2 years ago, if we can go to the next slide, we spent a lot of time with the Bureau of Engineering with the city. And if we can go back one slide, please. When we met in a parking lot where we talked through how we would deploy this product at scale and this technology. And with the city's approval, we were able to demonstrate this in a parking lot. And this was roughly 19 months ago, to where we went through our pre-process where, and I missed it on the couple previous slides. One thing we do with micro trenching that's different than traditional open trenching, when we get our locates and we get our 811 and we pothole, we also do what we call ground penetrating radar. And with the GPR process, it basically provides an X-ray of what's just under the surface below the asphalt that isn't necessarily located. And we demonstrated that technology along with it's just an extra piece that we do to ensure that we're going to avoid any sort of utility strike when we perform the work. So following the 811 process, doing our potholes, we also provide that extra ground penetrating radar to see what's under the surface of the pavement. And we did this in this parking lot. We provided the trench, we reinstated the trench, and you can see in the bottom right what it looks like when we're done restoring. And as a partner with Bureau of Engineering, we also came back at a later time and several months later and did a core sample of that trench. And that's the picture on the right where we did some compression testing. We followed up on how the reinstatement material was adhering to the sides of the trench. And ultimately what it led to was the approval of this methodology and technology in the city of LA. And if you go to the next slide, this was actually the very first trench that we did in LA, and where we have really focused on when we deploy in the right of way has been kind of that front of curb. And we've all seen the curbs where there might be a wavy piece when it goes to the front of the curb apron. We've been able to deploy along that running line because there's very limited utilities generally right in front of that curb area. And that was our very first micro trench. And today, I mean, those were pictures we took recently of well over a year old in deployment. To date, we've done close to 40 miles of micro trenching in the city of LA over the last 14 months. And one thing I want to point out is that's investment in infrastructure that has resulted in thousands of strands of fiber optic cable that have been deployed that in neighborhoods that didn't have it before. And it's been deployed to improve broadband service to really millions within the Los Angeles market. And it's been very, very successful in this partnership we have in LA. And I know there's a lot of questions and feelings on micro trenching, and we're happy to talk through. And again, I want to really drive the emphasis of the approach we're taking around staying in that 16-inch range. We feel will avoid future conflicts, but it's also helps us to scale in a way that can provide a long-term asset for our business model. So we can go to the next slide. In talking through what we did in LA, one of the most important pieces we feel in our discussions with the Bureau of Engineering was identifying what is the design standard within the city and that any provider can use. And when we look at the different components, to running line, to depth, to a T-top type grind and overlay on our trench, we did come up with the typical, what we call the typical or design standard within the city. And we followed a very clear path where we introduced the technology, we demonstrated the technology, we did what we said we were going to do, and then ultimately it led to the adoption. And where we feel it's been important on this design standard is it gives a reassurance to the city that with this, in following this design standard, it's able to be replicated and ensure that there's a quality component long term. And in shifting a little bit, going into the next slide, I want to shift a little bit from the underground component and go to the aerial component, and really also talk through how important it is even on a design standard for aerial fiber deployment. In the city of Long Beach, where we have deployed extensively with our aerial fiber network, if we go to the next slide, we met with the city early last year and came up with a plan to where when we have a project to deploy several miles of network, it might be resulting of anywhere from 25 to 30 permits. And those are 25 to 30 permits that are processed one at a time, and they go through the entire review. And in meeting with the city of Long Beach, we were able to say, hey, can we get a term permit for this entire project? Maybe different areas within the city, but we're going to follow this design standard. We're going to follow, and ensure that we're meeting the requirements, but also drive a strong post-inspection process to ensure, again, we deployed what we said we were going to deploy. And it resulted in a term permit issuance back in last summer in 2020, where we deployed over 40,000 feet of fiber in multiple neighborhoods, and we did it in days. And in talking through, like we did with microtrenching, where we were able to deploy very, very quickly, very limited impact to the right-of-way and those driving down streets. We were able to accomplish the same thing with this term permit in the city of Long Beach, where we were able to get this work done, kind of a bulk approach to it, to where we were able to get in and out of areas very, very quickly. And it again drove a significant success story where we have improved wireless broadband capability to well over 500,000 residents. So these are just a couple items that we feel have driven investment that wouldn't have happened necessarily otherwise, but also been impactful to many in the Southern California area. I do want to hand this off to Kome with SCAG, Southern California Council of Governments, and get his input on this process, and they're very impactful to this term permit. So can hand off to Kome at this time, or Micah.
Sure, absolutely. And that's where we're going next. So thank you so much. And there were a lot of, you're doing some real work, which is really interesting. And there are a lot of questions that have come in for you.
Absolutely.
If we could get Kome, if you want to join us up here on the screen. And thank you so much. Of course, he's the executive director of the Southern California Council of Governments. And I'm going to take just a second. We're talking about broadband. Broadband is a crucial issue to racial and economic equity. I think it's really been highlighted by the pandemic. But before we dive back into some of the details of broadband, I just really want to praise the work that you and Jenna Hordenstock and the rest of your staff is doing on inclusive economic development. The regional agencies play such an important role in transportation and in land use, but those have, fundamental impacts on people's lives. And so the fact that under your leadership, SCAG is really rethinking everything it does internally and externally around racial and economic equity is extraordinarily important. And so I know that's not easy work. None of this work is easy work, but I wanted to make sure that there are people out here cheering for you and wanting to support you and your staff. and the elected leaders of SCAG taking this on. So thank you for that. Let's talk about one of the really important things that we need for racial and economic equity, which is better broadband.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Micah. I'm going to have you come speak to my board, just like you just said, so I can
Happy to do it.
Self-serve that way. Really appreciate the invitation to join this discussion. It's a very important conversation that we're having. You know, I'm reminded that about a year ago, exactly April of 2020, we began a conversation in Southern California about how we become resilient to the effects of the pandemic. We were in the throes of the pandemic, and one of the things that came out of that discussion is this focus on broadband as one of two things that we focused on, and we've since taken that on. The first step we had to take was to create a sort of a policy framework for broadband discussion. So we came up with a model resolution that was shared with all of our public agencies, and the resolution has since been adopted by 4 of our 6 counties, and also by SCAG and SANDAG, because we were in this 7-county consortium, basically talking about broadband. That resolution sort of created the backdrop to have a conversation beyond just the traditional SCAG things that we do, like transportation and air quality and climate, but to begin to look at broadband as a critical infrastructure because of its connection to education and health. So it becomes really a critical infrastructure as a result of those conversations. As we were walking through that, and we adopted our resolution, which really required us, the board gave us a task to do a gap assessment and also develop a streamlined permit process. And you know, I'm really excited about what Doug just showed you about the technology that has since developed in this trenching business to try and put broadband across our region. I have to say that Micah showed you a number of maps earlier on at the beginning about the broadband, how it's expressed across the state, and it looks like we're doing okay in Southern California. But the point of the matter is we don't have as dense a service as the map would suggest. What the map is showing is there is broadband access into most of the census tracts in our region, but in fact, at least 10%, if not more, of our population don't have access to real internet, and so they can't participate in telehealth or teleeducation. So that becomes an imperative for us. So the first step then was to identify where the gaps are. So we proceeded in doing some mapping and using coming up with the same maps that you saw earlier on. But now we're taking it a step further to look at a cross-tabulation of our maps based on the FCC CPUC data, but to begin to look at mapping data from the education sector and also from the health sector in terms of who's using, who doesn't have telephone access to consult on health, and which kids don't have access to broadband for school. So beginning to overlap those, I think is going to give us a more granular detail as to where the service gaps are in broadband. And to really engage the private sector, one of the things that we found out when we started talking to the private sector is what is the one thing that we could do right now that would be the difference. And I think the chorus of consensus that we got was we need to rationalize the permit process. Now, you saw the presentation that Doug gave you, which is really an excellent advance in how we should be doing business. It works if you are working within one city, you can contain it. But if you're trying to service in many of our communities of concern in Southern California, they're smaller, very small cities, and running 40 miles, you could go through 5 or 6 different jurisdictions. How do we make sure that each one of them is coordinated? And so that was the essence of this MALU resolution that we've had adopted. It's to create the policy framework, but we're also working on streamlining the permit process such that it allows for a reasonable cost for permit fees, so there is some certainty in what the cost is for the private providers to come in, but it also provides, more importantly, certainty on on the process of how we get the permits approved. Which desks do the permits have to go through before they get approved? Having that kind of control and certainty is the work that we're busy doing right now. And so we're going through a process right now of doing a survey with each one of our cities, going through our sub-regional entities to try and address that. That process is coming in slowly. We have 191 cities within the SCAG region and 6 counties, so 197 different jurisdictions that we're trying to coordinate. Not all of them are going to need this particular level of coordination, but the idea is to begin to develop a rational process that allows us to begin to look at broadband in terms of implementation as we would look at a roadway project. There are very standardized processes that we have in place for all road construction across all government levels, which allows for the construction industry on the road construction side to have a very clear template of how to approach any road infrastructure improvement. I think the same can be had for broadband. And so that's one role that SCAG feels like it can fill as a convener within the region of bringing these folks together. Obviously, the next level is also to bring about funding. And we think the funding that we're looking to bring to the region, which will go through our various jurisdictions, would be best spent if, in fact, we have a rational process in terms of permitting, so we're not wasting precious public funds. So that's the work that we're doing at SCAG right now. I'm glad to take questions at the end of the conversation. I just want to stop here and see if there are any questions.
Well, that is perfect timing because we are moving into the questions period of the webinar. And I'll come speak to your board, man. I'll talk to anybody that you want to talk to. So next slide, Lauren. As we move into the questions and answers, I want to bring up Trish Kelly from Valley Vision. She is the one of the longtime heads of our Broadband for All working group through the California Economic Summit. And I was just thinking, you and Sonny Wright McPeak and some other folks, you're like a successful Sisyphus, right? Because I bet that for years and years, it felt like you were just rolling the rock of broadband up the hill just to have it roll back down. But I think we've actually gotten the rock of broadband over the mountain. So, thank you for all the work that you've done during this time. Let's move into some of the questions that we have from the audience for our presenters.
Thank you very much, Micah. I think the key is living long enough that you can see the rock actually not roll back down the hill, or the long arc, as they say, bends toward justice. So thank you so much, Micah. And again, the support of California Forward for all this work. I did want to mention, very apropos to our discussion today, that we have just finished a new resource guide for getting connected for local officials. And that is also a project that was supported by the California Emerging Technology Fund. We're going to be rolling that out on Monday, and then we have a webinar that California Forward, CTF, and Valley Vision are sponsoring on May 14th. We hope you all join us. It has more detailed information on these practical tools that our presenters were talking about today. The resolutions that Kome was talking about are included there, so it's really a guide to try to help people accelerate private and public sector investment and to really help us get ready for what's coming next with all these new funding sources. So I want to thank our speakers for a fantastic, practical, but inspiring view on the things that we can do in our communities to move broadband forward. So our first question is for John. And how did you have to dig the trench to lay fiber? Did any sewer, water, or phone companies assist in laying the conduit fiber or fiber?
So we haven't started construction on this yet, but what's interesting is the reason we're able to do our project in Western Nevada County is because of the Vast Networks Middle Mile project. It actually completely goes through all the main laterals where we'll be connecting to off of that. So that is a big deal. If that wasn't here, it'd be much harder to build the network we're building here. So that's been And they're, of course, they're all bored and underground. We will be primarily boring in our county. We're going to be all underground because of our fire danger here. And if you look at the poles here and the amount of cables that are on the poles and the trees that are like, pushing through them, we would be in the business of repair for the next 20 years. And we don't want to do that as well. So yeah, we'll be underground. However, I am going to call Doug because I want to find out more about the fact that they figured out how to microtrench in a great way.
Great, thank you. And then for Doug, a question from Peter Pratt from the PUC. Do you find that local permitting authorities in California are now allowing for microtrenching techniques?
We have a lot of discussions, and we work in well over 95 different jurisdictions in the state of California, and I'll say we have approval in 3, and it's an ongoing conversation, and we meet with them individually because we want to make sure that we are addressing their concerns and for what they have in the right of way in each jurisdiction. So it's an ongoing discussion, and do we have it where it's unilaterally approved or met to where it's accepted right away? No, we're finding it to be about when we do find success, a 12 to 18 month long process.
Not exactly the time to speed to get projects through. Are you finding different when you're working with the jurisdictions? Do they have different concerns, or are they kind of consistent?
They're consistent, and really some of the items are resurfacing, which we talk through with the depth that we're microtrenching at, to where we feel we're well under any future mill and pave. The other concern is around reinstatement materials, and we provide all of the information, MSDSs, for the reinstatement materials we utilize. And then kind of the top surface component. For example, in Los Angeles, we do a T-top or a mill and pave on top of our trench, 12 inches wide, and not always ideal because it could result in another trip out, but that is what we have found how we've had to approach it in certain jurisdictions, where some we are able to use some overband material that allows us to be done with a project within hours. So it varies within jurisdictions, but it's pretty consistent on what those issues are.
Great, thank you. And also Doug from Clodaldo Barrera, what is the cost per mile of microtrenching, and how many signal pairs are in one of your cables?
So for the signal pairs, or I'm assuming what we're talking through is around able to locate, we have a 22 gauge signal wire in the interduct package we're using for all locating in the future. We also have the ability to locate on our any sort of sheath that would be in the actual fiber optic cable, if I'm understanding that question correctly. And when it comes to cost really gets driven by the type of reinstatement and work we have to do in relation to the top component. So we have a T-top that can almost double the cost of the trench, where it could be prohibitive. So cost per mile, I'll put it where we're seeing it to be roughly 20% of traditional open trenching. And why I'm kind of being vague there is open trenching in some markets could be ranging anywhere from $60 to $70. In some markets, it could be as high as $400 to $450 a foot. So how we would microtrench in those would also scale for that market. So what we're, it's in a 20 to 25% of the overall cost of what it would be to open trench.
It's a huge cost savings.
And if there's anything, and if there's anything specific, and anyone wanted to discuss on a market specific, happy to meet with them as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, here's another question for you, Doug, from Mark Evanoff. Could you describe the process you're going through to lay fiber in communities where you have cell towers, or lay fiber in lieu of paying rents on cell towers? So I think perhaps this is also maybe how local governments can monetize the assets that they have to help, with investment or infrastructure?
So when it comes to building out specifically for small cell, we are basically any small cell node out there ties back to a tower in some capacity. And we're able to utilize this for our backbone as well as for any lateral component going to an individual small cell node or business, enterprise type customer. I'm not 100% sure I understand the question component to it, but we build to not just Crown Castle towers, we'll build to any tower or what our carrier is. So we utilize this for any sort of fiber deployment for whether it's a Crown Castle tower or not. And it's able to provide the necessary bandwidth for really unlimited amount of nodes off of that tower.
And this is something that you need for 5G, right?
Correct. So when you look at the technologies, when it comes to Internet of Things, especially 5G, it's very fiber rich. And, what used to be able to be done wirelessly or over traditional, even copper from the ILEC days for 3G, 4G, it is a requirement to have fiber optics in each one of these nodes, and in some cases we're building up to 8 fibers per node. So to deploy thousands of small cells, it's equaling a significant amount of fiber strands to be deployed.
Great, thank you, Doug. So another question, which would be, I think, relevant for John also, but for you, is how does the 2 by 16-inch trench survive with heavy snow? So LA, we don't have too much snow, but you're working in a lot of other communities.
Absolutely. So the pressure rating of the material that we're using is up to 2,800 PSI, and in many cases stronger than the existing road base. So, and that was some of the compression testing and the way that we have formulated the reinstatement material. There's no shrinkage or very little shrinkage, and is able to really become one of the strongest parts of that road. And that's what actually LA really liked about it. We have deployed this in several cold markets. We do this in New York City currently, where we see the colder temperatures and those winters. So from a snow load, there's no impact, or there's no concern there from being able to survive. So it's a very high pressure rated reinstatement material.
Great, thank you, Doug. And another question from Carl Nettleton, which I think you partly answered. Please compare the cost of micro trenching to the cost of traditional trenching. But here's the other aspect of it: pole deployment and any other technology. So we've kind of covered the trenching aspect. But
Right. Aerial deployment will, I will say, it's pretty much going to be the cheapest method of deployment still today. Now, when you're operating in some markets where we have very high fire danger, as John mentioned earlier, that when the requirements to change out poles, and you look at the cost per mile when it comes to having to change out 60 to 70% of poles, it's then cheaper to microtrench. So depending on what type of pole that we're on, if it's a power, working with the power utilities to do that, it adds up very fast and very expensive for those pole change outs. So the cost per mile would be cheaper to microtrench if we had to change out that 60 to 70% pole range, which we've seen in some markets that are in the high fire range.
thank you. Another question from Tom West. Are you into any working in any counties, rural counties in Northern California? Tom is from Mendocino area, good coastal. Yeah.
Okay, so not yet. And really, where with Crown Castle, and we have a lot of infrastructure planned over the next several years. When we are aware of Northern California, let's say, where we could be working in 20 to 30 different jurisdictions, hopefully in the future, this is something we partner with our government affairs team to plan out. So current no active projects in Northern California. However, we have met with several jurisdictions in Northern California on this possibility being used to help us, hopefully move forward with some projects in the future. So no current active ones, unfortunately, but hopeful in the future.
Thank you. I know we've talked with the team over the last year and really eager to see how we can partner. And I would encourage, and I think this is what you're doing, is to work with the regional broadband consortia, because we can help be a bridge for that. And then really exciting to see the work of SCAG and SANDAG, and we're working here with SACOG on similar conversations to work with our councils of government to try to have more of that regional perspective on adoption of policies and ordinances that would help provide that consistency and coordination. So Doug, another question from Tom West: have you microtrenched on any California state highways? And you may be aware that we have had a project we're working on with Caltrans where we've identified strategic broadband corridors. And
right.
So that's another priority for us.
We have discussed it, have not deployed this on Caltrans yet. So definitely an option in the future, and we hope to, but we have not utilized this yet on any Caltrans or state highway right away yet.
Okay, great. And Caltrans does have broadband coordinators in each of the Caltrans districts, so that can be another resource for all of us to help look at these projects on the corridors. So Doug, you're popular today from Jeffrey Forrest. The Jobs Act, the new federal Recovery Act, focuses on broadband for all. Can your company work with communities to develop a proposal for funding?
Absolutely. And I don't know if Rochelle from our team is on, but we've done this already, even prior, and it's something that we're very proud of, and that we've worked with communities for this when we deployed, there's 15 council districts in the city of LA. We've microtrenched in all 15 of those, and we have worked with some council members specific to their council districts in some job creation relating to us being able to deploy this technology. So absolutely on board with that.
Great, thank you. For John, a question. This is from Krista Buzin. She said she's a real estate broker in Eastern Nevada and Placer counties, and stated earlier about AT&T presumably not continuing DSL when a house sells. She said that we are still seeing AT&T allowing transfer of DSL service in our main higher density community where we work, but not in the most of the rural areas of Eastern Nevada and Placer. This obviously affects real estate value significantly if there is no similar or better alternative. Are you aware of a drop dead date that will stop allowing transfer of DSL altogether?
So there's a trick to this, and I'm gonna let everyone know. If you're selling a home, keep your AT&T DSL phone line and service on, and then add the new owner onto your plan, so your name stays there at the beginning. It's going to require a lot of trust. And then when the new homeowner walks in after about a year, you kind of drop the main person, you move up to the top area, and you don't get turned off. It's horrible that we have to do this, but it works in the short term. If you actually try to transfer service, she's right, it won't work. They won't turn it on. So that's a trick. I'm turning that out, and I'm glad to talk to her offline about our future plans.
Great. She said, what can they do to help? So that seems a good transition. Back to Micah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Kome. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug, for putting up with perhaps the most intense grilling of questions that we've had during one of these webinar series. So I think there was a lot of interest there. And it shouldn't take so many tricks, right? I mean, there are so many people who kind of figured out workarounds to get DSL service, which itself is not, especially good broadband. And so we're gonna try to move to a world where we can take for granted that we have access to the internet, particularly as this pandemic period stretches on and on, and don't have to engage in so many backflips in order to participate in society and commerce and school. All right, so thanks everybody. Just quickly, please do join us in person at the California Economic Summit. In person, it's going to be in person. Let's just say that, in Monterey, November 9th and 10th. and you can donate to support the work. And really, I know, do you need another newsletter? Yes, you need this newsletter. If you're not signed up for it, it's got tremendous information about what's going on in the legislature right now on broadband, and a ton of other issues that we work on through the California Economic Summit. So last slide, Lauren. All right, so our next webinar series next week is focused on another critical issue for our network in the California Economic Summit, and that is affordable home ownership and really building racial and economic equity through home ownership. This is shockingly actually a controversial issue in California, as any issue around housing is, but it's absolutely essential to equity in our state. So I do hope that you'll join us and really appreciate everyone who joined us today. Take care, folks.